Welcome to the Business in UK presentation. In this video, we briefly discuss political, economic, social-cultural, technological, environmental, and legal context of United Kingdom in order to identify how attractive this country is for entering it as a market or an investment site. From space, you can see the two largest of the British Isles, Great Britain and Ireland, as if floating in the Atlantic, 3,000 miles from America and 21 miles from France. The United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is a country that consists of four co-equal and sovereign nations, England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. Each of these constituencies, except for England, have their own parliaments and their own slightly differing legal procedures. But whether people living in these constituent countries call themselves Scottish, Welsh, Irish, or English, they are all British citizens. The population of Great Britain is 64.1 million. It is twice as populous as the state of California, which means that 1 in every 111th person on the planet is a resident of UK. England is the most populated, making up 83.9%. Only 8.4 live in Scotland and even less in Wales and Northern Ireland. Old Europe is getting old, and fast. Due to a combination of increased longevity and low fertility rates, for the first time in history, British over 65 outnumber those under the age of 16. The capital of UK is London, a megacity with 8.4 million residents. The official language in UK is English, but in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, it is both Scottish Gaelic, Welsh, and Irish respectively. The census administered in 2011 revealed that 92% named English as their main language. The most common among other main languages was Polish, with 546,000 Polish residents in UK. Although a state religion exists, it is not mandatory, and religious freedoms exist throughout the UK. UK follows the trend of many other nations, which in recent years have become increasingly secular. The remaining religions make up a small section of the population. The largest of these sections is Islam. UK is a parliamentary democracy and a constitutional monarchy. It has numerous political parties, but the major three are Conservative, Labour, and Liberal Democratic. The political party that wins in general election forms the government, and a winning party's leader becomes Prime Minister. However, the head of state is not the Prime Minister, but the Queen, who is also a Commander-in-Chief, a Defender of Faith, Head of Commonwealth, and together with her bicameral parliament represents the third part of legislature. The Queen governs according to the Constitution rather than her own will, and remains politically neutral. The British Constitution, unlike that of the United States, is not set out as a single document, but rather in a series of historic documents such as Magna Carta or a Bill of Rights, and a combination of laws and Parliament Acts. The Prime Minister, who is currently David Cameron, the leader of the Conservative Party, is the head of the UK government, who is ultimately responsible for the policy and decisions of the government. Unlike the American president, the British Prime Minister is not elected. The leader of the political party that receives absolute majority in general elections automatically becomes Prime Minister. The House of Commons is the elected chamber of Parliament. It debates big issues, proposes laws, amends existing ones, and challenges the government's work. There are 650 members of Parliament who each represent a constituency in the UK. The Prime Minister, together with nominated by him 20 senior ministers, is also a member of Parliament, thereby representing both legislative and executive branches of government. The House of Lords is the second chamber of Parliament, made mostly of 92 hereditary peers, bishops, and life peers who are not elected but nominated. The House of Lords scrutinizes bills that have been approved by the House of Commons. While it is unable to prevent bills passing into law, it can delay bills and force Commons to reconsider their decisions. According to freedomhouse.org, similar to the United States, UK is a politically free country that allows all citizens who reach the age of 18 to vote directly for their MPs, who have a decisive impact on public policies and accountable to the electorate. Britain is a country of political stability, and the Conservative government has always had a reputation of being business-friendly. It steadily finances innovation and lowered the corporate tax by 1% in 2015.
Since 2012, the United Kingdom Economic Freedom Score has increased, manifesting improvements in 5 out of 10 economic freedoms. The UK has developed its economy on a strong rule of law, open trading environment, and advanced financial sector. According to the GDP index, the UK is the third largest economy in Europe after Germany and France, but the UK GDP annual growth puts it among the first of these competitors, though it is significantly lower than the USA GDP growth. The UK GNI PPP per capita is 70.6% of the USA PPP. Such PPP also places UK behind Germany, France, and all Scandinavian countries. By applying Big Mac Index, we can see that the cost of Big Mac in the UK is $4.93, as compared to $4.80 in the US. FDI into Europe declined in 2013 in comparison with 2012, but the UK still remains the leading country in Europe with inward FDI. The UK also attracted 52 R&D projects, 20% more than Germany, giving it a Europe-leading market share of 18% in R&D FDI. On the Human Development Index, the UK scored 14th, but the US was 5th, and the difference in unemployment rate is insignificant at 0.2%. The top items on the United Kingdom export list are machinery, transport equipment, manufactured products, chemical products, mineral fuels, lubricants, and related materials. Its main export partners are the United States, Germany, Switzerland, France, and the Netherlands. Among many others, the UK major articles of imports are nuclear reactors, boilers, machinery, and electrical machinery, and manufactured products. The country's main import partners are Germany, the United States, China, Netherlands, and France. What attracts countries to invest in the UK is its quality of life, technology and telecommunications, infrastructure, and stability of social structure. Companies that have already invested in the UK tend to be more positive about the UK's attributes for FDI and are more likely to invest in it again in the future. Other differentiators are financing, taxation, support for key industries, and access to highly qualified workforce. Irresistible draw of the London, the country's jewel in the crown, caused the increase of projects coming to London and accounted for nearly half of all the UK investments, with particular strength in areas such as R&D and headquarters projects. When all of these factors come together, as they did in 2013, the UK is able to attract the leading share of investments from major markets. Although England is part of the European Union, they still use the pound and have yet to convert over to the euro. The UK has traditionally had a very strong currency, and the public has consistently opposed joining the euro.
The results of 2011 Great British Class Survey revealed a new model of 7 classes, ranging from the elite at the top to a precariat at the bottom, and the other 5 manifesting a rising social mobility between the middle and the working class. However, as much as in the United States, the gap between the very rich and the very poor is widening. Hofstede's cultural typology chart revealed that there are more similarities between the British and American cultures than there are between the British and the French. However, there are some differences. On the power distance dimension, both countries are relatively close in their scores, with the United States surprisingly 5 points higher. Regardless of existing class structure, perception of equality is more natural in Britain. Apparently, there will be a higher expectation of equality in decision making and slightly less hierarchical barriers, protocol obstacles in UK. Having highly individualistic cultures, both countries scored high on individualism versus collectivism dimension. In both cultures, children are taught from an early age to think for themselves and to find out what their unique purpose in life is. In both countries, the route to happiness is through personal fulfillment. Driven by competition, achievement, and success, both nations scored high on the masculinity index. Though UK scored higher than US, typical American drive to individual achievement seemed less apparent in British culture. It is because the Americans show it up front, whereas British will take you by surprise. Critical to understanding the British is the ability to read between the lines. What is said is not always what is meant. Similarly, Hall's chart indicates that UK is closer to a high context culture than US. From this quality comes the implicative mode of British communication. At 35, the British scored low on uncertainty avoidance, which means that they're quite happy to wake up not knowing what the day brings. The combination of strong individualism with low uncertainty avoidance results in a high level of creativity and a strong need for innovation. 11-point difference probably indicates that Americans are ready to embrace innovation, but without British overpowering enthusiasm. The British score of 51 on long-term orientation versus short-term orientation made Hofstede consider its position as undetermined, while the United States scoring 26 apparently belonged to a short-term orientation culture that drives individuals to strive for quick results within the working place. Both cultures score identically very high on indulgence dimensions. The Americans and the British exhibit willingness to realize their desires with regards to enjoying life and having fun. Both nations possess positive attitudes and have a tendency towards optimism. Let's now look at Trompenaars' typology. The British and the Americans scored extremely high in universalism. Members of both societies adhere to general rules, regulations, and obligations. That is why in both cultures, once agreement is reached and signed, it is not to be further renegotiated. A deal is a deal. On individualism, UK and US both scored lower than on Hofstede's dimension, apparently manifesting recent shifts towards more communitarianist societies. Both countries manifest a certain degree of neutrality. Though the British may not appear terribly animated when they speak, they do experience strong emotions. They merely choose not to put them on public display. If you have insulted someone, his or her facial expression may not even change. It is all about achieving business objective. Being members of specific cultures, the British and Americans tend to keep separately their social life and work. The British will not necessarily give you a tour of their home, and in fact may keep most doors closed. They expect others to respect their privacy. Similarly to the Americans, they place a high value on personal space. On achievement versus ascription, the British score is significantly lower than Americans, because they still have a tendency to identify someone by title or status rather than personal achievement. For British, the question where their partner studied is more important than what they studied. However, the situation is changing rapidly. A manifestation of such change, for example, is the House of Lords Act of 1999, according to which all but 92 are not hereditary but life peers, who are now appointed for their competence and profound knowledge rather than their birthright. Since in both cultures people believe in controlling outcomes of their activities and their environment, both cultures are interdirected. On this dimension, US and UK scored highly, with Britain 5 points below, probably because Americans have a reputation of being exceptionally optimistic and the British apparently are more realistic.
The UK plays a leading part in the aerospace industry, with companies including Rolls-Royce, manufacturing aero engines, BAE Systems, acting as the Pentagon's sixth largest defense supplier, and GKN, a major supplier to the Airbus project. UK pharmaceuticals have discovered and developed more leading medicines than any other country apart from the United States. Scientific research and development remains important for British universities, with many establishing science parks to facilitate production and cooperation with industry. The future of UK economic growth will be driven by innovation in four key technology areas: advanced materials, biosciences, electronics and sensors and photonics, information and communication technology. Britain gets more electricity from offshore wind farms than all other countries combined. In 2012, it added nearly 5 times more offshore capacity than Belgium, the next keenest nation, and 10 times more than Germany. Britain's enthusiasm for offshore wind turbines is explained by the European law that requires them to generate about 30% of EU countries' electricity from renewable sources by 2020. For the UK, that means up from about 13% now. The Department of Business, Innovation and Skills and Innovate UK offer businesses to apply for a share of $94.2 million for developing low-emissions propulsion technologies that would deliver significant reductions in CO2 or other emissions. The UK air pollution results in 29,000 early deaths annually, and it causes cancer, heart attacks, and undeveloped lungs in children. In 2015, the UK's highest court has ruled that the government must take immediate action to reduce air pollution under European law.
According to the Worldwide Governance Indicator for Rule of Law, the UK achieves a high rank of 92.9. For investors, this suggests that the UK has an established and transparent legal system, maintains a clear set of laws that are followed, relies on a largely independent judiciary, and boasts strong protection of intellectual property. To some degree, each country in the UK employs a mixed legal system, combining elements of civil law and common law. As a member of the European Union, the UK is also required to incorporate European legislation into UK law and to recognize the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice in matters of EU law. England and Wales have a combined judicial system, while Scotland and Northern Ireland have their own judicial systems. However, despite these distinct jurisdictions, the UK Supreme Court remains the highest court in the UK and final court of appeal for all UK civil cases, and for criminal cases in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. The UK Supreme Court, which consists of 12 justices, was established in 2009 and created a separation of power between the sovereign and judicial branch of UK government. Investors must be aware of UK anti-corruption law. On the Heritage Foundation's Economic Freedoms Index, the UK received a score of 76 for freedom from corruption. In 2010, the UK Bribery Act was passed. The Bribery Act is similar to the United States Foreign Corrupt Practices Act in many respects, but there are significant differences. For example, in contrast to the FCPA, which applies only to the corruption of foreign officials, the Bribery Act catches bribes offered or given to any person. Also, the FCPA creates an exemption for facilitating payments, whereas the Bribery Act makes no such exception. On the Heritage Foundation's Economic Freedoms Index, the UK received a high score of 90 for property rights. 4 main intellectual property rights are recognized in the UK: patents, trademarks, copyright, and design rights.
The UK has the lowest unemployment rate since the mid-1970s. It has the third largest economy in Europe, the first among FDI inflows, and a very strong exchange rate. In addition, some of the weaknesses the UK has is a growing gap between the rich and poor, an aging population, a large government budget deficit, and unaffordable housing. The UK also provides a lot of opportunities, including a strong governmental enforcement of intellectual property laws, the least amount of barriers for entrepreneurs in the world, strongest environment for research and development in Europe, and also UK is just a great place to live. Some of the threats they have is a switch to the euro, uncertainty of the 2017 referendum on European Union memberships, and EU fines for high levels of NO2 and CO2.